What's going on, yo? I wanted to give you some practical tips when it comes to working around and training through injuries and pain. And firstly, if you've got any kind of injury that is inhibiting your ability to do the movement, or you have to compensate so much to move away from the pain that it's compromising your movement pattern and it's actually changing the way that you're moving, you don't want to do that. That's like the first thing. It's a big no because pain is really good at rewiring the nervous system. And what may have taken you 3 to 5,000 reps to build into a habit and to build good form, if you get hurt or if there's any kind of pain associated with it and you start to compensate, it doesn't take long to rework that pattern because your body's really good at moving away from pain. And so you can undo a lot of the work that you've done, and then once you establish that new pattern, it could then take another 3 to 5,000 reps to get yourself back to a normal pattern, assuming that you are out of the pain. And even still, if you've gone so long compensating, it can be really hard to unwind that. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is stay away from pain medication unless absolutely necessary. Like, if you can't sleep because you're in pain and that helps you sleep as you're recovering, then that's one thing. But if you're having to take a bunch of pain medication just to show up to train, it can be hard to know what is actually creating more damage on what movements that you should be staying away from. Because if you're just numbed out, then you're not going to know what you should and shouldn't do. So I usually recommend in practice, don't use any kind of pain medication if you can tolerate it, and just allowing the pain to be your guide, because that's going to be the biggest source of feedback you're going to get is the pain. And again, this goes from anything from your neck to your shoulder to your knees to your toes to whatever, your hips. It's all going to be the same kinds of principles. And so with those two big ones, when it comes to actually training and what the training process looks like, it really, again, depends on your ability to be able to execute the movement without compensating for the pain. So if you feel any kind of discomfort or pain, but you're still able to do the movement properly and you're not compensating and it's not getting worse, because if you're doing a movement and the pain is getting worse, that's an indicator. Don't do that movement or modify the movement. But if you can do it and it's not getting worse, it's just kind of there, like me, I had a little like collarbone thing, and it's like, it's just there. It doesn't really get any worse, but it is kind of annoying, but I can still do the movements without really compensating. Then I can do the movements. I can still train. It's just not that comfortable. And it's healing. And that's the other side of that. If it's continuing to get worse, then you need to take extra measures, because a lot of times, you can just rest and your body's very good at adapting and, doing what it has to do to build itself and adapt to whatever you're throwing at it. But if you're doing things and it's getting worse, then that's your cue. All right, I need to stay away. And any kind of modifications, because there's so many times too where you feel something and it feels kind of painful, it's uncomfortable, and because of that you're like, oh, I shouldn't do anything. But in reality, there's a lot of things that you can still do, and movement is medicine. And so as soon as you can get back to doing movement and like slowly integrating whatever the movement patterns are that may have been painful or that may be a little painful, the sooner you can get back to that, the sooner you're going to be able to recover, because it's going to speed that process up. Because if if your hip hurts and it's painful to squat, and so you just don't squat, and the pain goes away, and then you start squatting again, if you didn't address the movement and the pattern and maybe what caused it in the first place, then more than likely you're just going to experience the same pain again. But if you're still able to do, even if it's like a partial squat or different variations, if you're still able to do the movement as you're going through the recovery process, you're going to speed up the recovery process, and you're going to not have to have this lag of being reintroduced to the movement because you've still been doing it. And the last thing that I'll give you is when it comes to different injuries and different things like that, I've recognized that just being an athlete, like there's always something. I really can't pinpoint a time where like every single piece of my body has felt 100%. And I manage myself pretty well, and I'm pretty conscious when I'm training. And luckily, I haven't really had anything severe in a while. The last kind of major injury I had was my wrist a couple of years ago. But usually, there's always something, and knowing these principles allows you to be able to continue to move and continue to train to the best of your ability so that you can keep the momentum going. Because as I've alluded to, the worst thing that you can do is just to completely stop everything every time, there's any little injury or anything like that. And then obviously, and this goes kind of without saying, but addressing the root cause. So especially if there's some kind of injury that is just continuing to repeat itself, and you might get better, but then it comes back again and again and again, that is your red flag. Like, there's something deeper that isn't being addressed. And it could be as simple as you're just the way that you're moving your body, and you might just be overloading certain patterns, certain movements, certain muscles. Or it could be a little bit more complex. It could be related to your diet. It could be related to mental, emotional patterns. It could be related to past trauma. Like there's so many different factors, and this is why, at Optimal Evolution, we take a holistic approach to these things. Because if you just, keep putting Band-Aids on things, then usually something else, just like putting duct tape over a hole in your boat, eventually another hole is going to pop up, and there's only so much duct tape that you can use before everything just finally gives way and the ship sinks. So you want to address the root cause as best as you can. So those are my tips for you when it comes to being in pain or being injured and still being able to train as best as you can to continue your momentum and to continue the process, and hopefully to speed up the recovery as well. So I hope that helps, and I look forward to sharing more with you again very soon.